Legal, regulatory and tax considerations. So we are right now going to analyze the legal, regulatory and tax considerations while analyzing or playing the role of a buyer of a bond. Mainly, the legal, regulatory and tax factors depend on jurisdiction. So we will consider these factors. Jurisdiction means we will ask two questions. One is where is it issued, and second is where is it trading. These two questions will basically answer most of our queries regarding legal, regulatory and tax considerations and their respective variations. So in this regard, we will know about a few kinds of bonds. One is a domestic bond, one is a foreign bond, one is a euro bond and one is a global bond. Let's see one by one what do they signify. So domestic bond. Domestic bond means a bond which is issued by an entity which is incorporated in a country, and the bond is issued in that same country. I'll repeat again. An entity which is incorporated in a certain country X releases or issues a bond in the same country X, then it becomes a domestic bond. For example, say if the Tata Group releases a bond in India, then it will be called a domestic bond. If Google releases a bond in USA, similarly, it will be called a domestic bond. Now, what is a foreign bond? The foreign bond is a bond which is released by an entity which is incorporated in some other country than the country of issuance. Say, if Toyota releases a bond in USA, it becomes a foreign bond. Or if Infosys, an Indian IT company, releases a bond in USA, it becomes a foreign bond. Now, because we are talking about releasing bonds or registering bonds in USA, we must remember that the regulatory body of USA is the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, registering something with SEC requires a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of clauses and laws and regulations that are there. Now, as a primary factor to bypass this registration process, a kind of bond was created which is called the euro bonds. Now, let us understand what is a euro bond. Euro bond is a bond which is issued by a syndicate which is not contained within any sovereign nation. The syndicate basically consists of entities from multiple nations. Now, it releases the bond in the euro bond market. In this issuance, US citizens cannot participate. So the bond is issued in the euro bond market. US citizens cannot participate in it because SEC registration is not there. But in the secondary market, US citizens can participate. Once the issue is done and the bond is floating in the markets, then in the secondary market, US citizens can easily enter into it. These bonds can be released and sold in Asia, Europe and various other continents, and it can be issued in various currencies. So there can be a euro yen bond, a euro dollar bond and even a euro denominated euro bond. Now let us understand what's a global bond. So we already understood that euro bond does not belong to any jurisdiction, single jurisdiction. So what is the difference between a global bond and a euro bond? The difference is, apart from being issued in the euro bond market, it is also issued in at least one of the domestic nations. This is the main difference between the euro bond and the global bond. Now, this foreign bond and the euro bond and the global bond together are called international bonds. Now we will understand what's a bearer bond and what's a registered bond. A bearer bond is a bond in which a trustee does not keep records of the buyers. So who has it? Only the clearing house has it, or the clearing entity has the records. Then what's a registered bond? A registered bond is simply a bond where the trustee does keep a record. Now, why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because Euro bonds earlier used to be bearer bonds, but later they were turned to registered bonds. Now we will look at the tax considerations, that is the different kinds of tax that are levied on the different income sources of a bond. So let's say we have a bond which is going to mature in 5 years, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is issued at 100% of par, that is $1,000 say, and it has 8% coupon. So it is going to pay $80 every period, right? And at the final period it will also pay 80 plus $1,000, which is the initial principal amount. Okay. Now, what are the taxes on this? This $80 of periodic income which the buyer is getting, this generally will be taxed through income tax. So income tax is a tax on periodic incomes. Now let's say a buyer does not hold the bond till t is equal to 5, right? He sells at t is equal to 3 because he is getting a good price. He is getting a price of $1,200 on the bond. Now once he sells it, he will be attracting something called a capital gains tax. Why? Because he paid a principal of 1,000. Now he is selling it at 1,200. This difference, this $200 worth of difference will attract something called capital gains tax. That is, capital gains have happened, there is a tax on it which is called capital gains tax. Tax on any gains on sell or retiring of a bond. In a very improbable scenario, let's say the company itself at the time of maturity, instead of paying 1,000 plus the interest, paid 1,200. Then would that attract capital gains tax? Yes, because the initial amount paid was $1,000, final amount received against it was all the interest that were due plus 1,000 plus 200. So this 200 also will attract capital gains tax. Also, although this is not something that happens usually, but this is just an example that we take to understand what's a capital gains tax. Now apart from these two taxes, there is also another tax which is called the discount provision tax. Now let's understand what's a discount provision tax. Let's say there is a bond which is going to pay a buyer $1,000 at maturity, right? And the yield the buyer is looking for is 8% like the previous one, and the maturity is 5 years. So how do we calculate what is going to be the initial amount he will be willing to pay? Simply we will do 1000 divided by 1.08 to the power 5. Let's calculate it, guys. 1000 divided by 1.08 to the power 5. So he will be paying $680.58 in the beginning. $680.58 in the beginning. Now apparently there should be only capital gains tax applicable to it, because at the end of 5 years there is a difference between the initial amount paid and the final amount in which the selling has happened or the retiring has happened. So the tax would be capital gains on this difference. Let's calculate what should be the difference. So 319.4168. So there should be capital gains tax on this and nothing else, because there are no periodic payments. You can see there are no periodic payments or end interest payments being mentioned. But there is a problem here. The problem is, over these 5 years, because no tax is being paid, the buyer can increase his cost base and just try to escape the tax payment. Buyer can increase his tax base, buyer can increase his cost base and try to escape the tax, this tax. So what is done is basically this 319 is divided into the number of periods. So what happens is 319.41, whatever the number is approximately, is divided into the number of periods, which is 5. So what do we get? 63.88. Now this amount is considered as an amount on which an yearly tax or a periodic tax is going to be levied. So every year, as part of the income tax, the discount provision tax is paid. Every year, as part of the income tax, the discount provision tax has to be paid. This is done to provide an equity between a regular coupon paying bond and a discounted bond. TPT equates a discount bond with a regular coupon paying bond. Bullet bond, fully amortized bond and partially amortized bond. What are they? Let's understand. We'll start with the bullet bond. So let's say again a bond is going to mature in 5 years, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the initial principal paid is 100% of par, which is $1,000 per unit, and the coupon is say 10%. So $100 of interest is paid every year. Now here in the interim periods there is no retiring of principal. The entire principal is paid at the end, that is t is equal to 5, which is the maturing year. This kind of a bond setup is called a bullet bond. This kind of a bond setup is called a bullet bond. If there is retiring of principal in between, this can be called amortized bond. Let's see how they work. Fully amortized bond. The difference between bullet bond and fully amortized bond means at maturity there is a fully amortized bond means over the period of maturity the principal will be retired in such a way that there will be identical, that is equal payments in every single period. Let's see how that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 years is the maturity period. Let us say initial payment is 100% of par, which is $1,000, and the interim payments are say 100, right? Now the interim payments will be such that the entire principal is distributed among the 5 periods and the payment amounts in each of this period will be equal, right? Now how do you calculate this? Let's see. The future value we will consider as 0. The present value we will consider as minus 1000. The coupon, obviously we will say it is 10%. So in our calc it is IY, we will call it 10%. Number of periods is 5 and we have to compute PMT, right? So this is what we have. Let's calculate it. 263.797. So these are the periodic payments, that is the identical periodic payments which will be made in a fully amortized bond. This is what we call a fully amortized bond. Whatever the maturity, for the entire period there will be identical payments, and in that way the interest and the principal both will be paid off. Now if I ask you, each of these payments has a interest portion and a principal portion, right, which is constantly varying from this to this, from this to this, it is varying. How would you calculate that? Let's do that. Now in the initial stage the principal is 1000, so the coupon as we know is 10%, so here interest is 100, so the remaining must be the principal. Let's calculate that. It's easy. 263.747 minus 100 is 163.747, right? Now, after paying off this principal, what is the principal left? It is 1000 minus 163.747. We quickly calculate it. That is 836.253. This is the interest, this is the principal retired, and this is the remaining principal. Now we will go to the second period, that is t is equal to 2. Now in the second period, what will be the interest proportion? It will be 10% of the remaining principal, that is 836.253 into 10%, which is 83.625. Now the principal is easy to calculate, which is 263.797 minus 83.625. This is 180.172. Now the remaining principal is 836.253 minus 180.172. $656.08. This is the remaining principal at t is equal to 2. Therefore, at t is equal to 3, the interest will be 10% of this. So it's quite easy. This is the interest, this is the principal. Again here 65.608. This is the interest, and the principal is 263.797 minus 65.608. This is 198.189. This is the principal at t is equal to 3. Therefore, remaining principal will be 656.081 minus 198.189. This comes to be 457.892. The next term, interest, is 10% of this. At t is equal to 4, interest will be 45.789, right? 10% of this principal. This is the interest. What is the principal then? 263.797 minus 45.789. This comes to be 218.008 approximately. If we want to find the remaining principal, it comes to be 239.884. This is at t is equal to 4, this is at t is equal to 3, this is at t is equal to 2, t is equal to 1, right? So, here the interest will be 10% of 239.884. To 3.99, let's say. This is the interest, right? Principal is 263.797 minus 23.99, 239.80, 239.807. Now if you subtract it with this, what do you get? a rounding error. So this becomes equal to 0, the remaining principal. Okay. So you can see these equal payments 263.797 have rendered a situation where these equal payments completely dissolve the principal and interest both. Now we will understand what's a partially amortized bond. Again, we will use mostly the same criteria. Let's say a bond has a maturity of 5 years. Its coupon is 10%. It's issued at $1,000, which is 100% of par. The maturity period is 5 years, as we said. Only one difference will be there. At maturity, there will be a payment of principal of 400. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here the unit price is 1000 and it is 100% of par and the coupon is 10%, but there is amortization of principal but not complete. There is amortization such that at the end one has to pay $400 plus some amount. So what are these amounts? These amounts 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, there are equal amounts. These will be equal amounts. How do we calculate it? Simple. We use the previous principal only at the place of future value, that is FV, we put 400. So future value is 400, present value is minus 1000, coupon is 10%, period is 5. We need to calculate the periodic payment, right? Let's see how it comes. 1000 is the PV, 400 FV, 10 is the coupon, 5 is the period. We compute the periodic payment, which comes to 198.278. So the periodic payment is 198.278. Now all these payments of 198.278, 198.278, these payments, they include both interest and principal. Now if we are to calculate what is the interest proportion and the principal proportion, how would we do that in case of a partially amortized bond? Let us see. In the first one, the principal amount that is paid is $1,000. Therefore, the interest is naturally 100. So the principal amount that is retired in the first period, that is t is equal to 1, is 98.278. 100 is the interest here and 98.278 is the principal. Therefore, the amount of principal which is remaining after this initial principal retirement is 1000 minus 98.278. This is equal to 901.722. Right? Therefore, we can easily decipher what is going to be the interest payment at t is equal to 2. It is going to be 10% of this 901.722. This will be 90.17. This is the interest that is paid, and therefore the principal is 198.278 minus 90.17. So the principal is 198.278 minus 90.17. This comes to be 108.1. So at t is equal to 2, the principal that is retired is 108.1. Therefore, the remaining principal is 901.722 minus 108.17. At t is equal to 2, the principal retired is 108.1. Therefore, the principal at t is equal to 2, the principal that is retired is 108.1. Therefore, the remaining principal is 901.722 minus 108.1. This is equal to 793.616. Now, from here we can find the interest at t is equal to 3. This is 79.36. The principal payment is 198.278 minus 79.36. This is equal to 118.916. This is the principal retired at t is equal to 3. Therefore, the remaining principal is 793.616 minus 118.916. This is equal to 674.699. 674.7 almost, you can say. Therefore, at t is equal to 4, the interest will be 10% of this. $67.47 is the interest at t is equal to 4. Therefore, the principal will be 67.47 minus 198.278. 130.808. We can write 130.81. Therefore, the remaining principal is 674.7 minus 130.81, which is 543.89. Therefore, the interest will be based on this, that is 10% of this. This comes to be $54.39 approximately. The principal amount is 143.88, 143.89 approximately. So, at t is equal to 5, this amortization payment contains 143.89 worth of principal. So, if you subtract it from the initial amount 543.89, the answer is 400. This 400 is actually retired simultaneously, right? So, as you can see, both in case of a partially amortized bond and in case of a fully amortized bond, we can find out what is the bifurcation between principal and interest in each of the periods. So, friends, now we will learn about something called a sinking fund bond. Let's say the bond maturity is 5 years, right? At time 0, the principal amount was $1,000. Now, in a sinking fund bond, what happens is this principal is retired in every period at a certain rate. If it's a constant rate, let's say if it's 5% constant rate, that means in the first phase, $50 out of this will be retired. That means the remaining principal will be $950. Again, in the next period, another 5% will be retired. That means 5% of 950 means 950 into 0.05 is 47.5 minus 950 is 902.5. $902.5 will be the remaining principal. Again, another 5% will be retired. Like this, till maturity, retirement will happen, and this entire principal, whatever is left, is going to be paid back at maturity. Now, what if the rate of sinking is accelerated? This means that instead of constant 5%, the rates will keep on increasing. Let's say if the initial principal was 1000, here 5% will be retired. Whatever is remaining here, let's say 7% of that will be retired. Then whatever is remaining out of that, let's say 10% will be retired. Like this, let's say 15%. Like this, retirements will happen. So this is an accelerated rate of sinking of the fund. So this is the basic concept of a sinking fund bond, guys. Now we will learn about a few coupon types. Coupon types means how the coupon has been planned. A floating rate note, let's see how that behaves. A floating rate note means a bond which will give you a coupon which will vary with the reference rate. Reference rate means, let's say, it's interbanking lending rates, right? Interbank lending rate, that is the rate at which banks are lending each other. This is the rate. Now, let's say the bond is having a maturity of 2 years. Now here, let's say the reference rate is 5% and the FRN says that it will pay reference rate plus 1%. So the total amount paid by it will be 6%. In the second period, let's say the reference rate at t is equal to 1 is 4%. Therefore, the amount paid by the FRN will be 5%, 4% plus 1%. In the next period, let's say it is 6%. So the amount paid is 7% plus the initial principal, right? This is how a floating rate note behaves. Inverse FRN. Inverse FRN means something which will reduce the interest the more the reference rate grows. I'll repeat again. Inverse FRN. Inverse FRN means a floating rate note that pays more when the interest rate goes down. Let's say maturity of an inverse FRN is 3 years. The initial principal amount is paid and the initial reference rate is 3%. Now the FRN says if this increases by 1%, we will pay 1% less. So at the initiation at t is equal to 0, this is 3%, right? So here, let's say the reference rate at t is equal to 1 remains at 3%. So the coupon will be 3%. There is no change. At t is equal to 2, let's say it became 4%. This will pay 3 minus 1. That is, because 1% rise has happened, this will pay 2%, 1% less. Let's say here it came to be 2%. Now here it will pay 4%. This is because the rate went down by 1%. The behavior is inverse. This is how an inverse FRN can behave. Step up coupon bonds. Step up means from period to period, the coupon will keep on rising by a certain number or a percent. Let's see how that will happen. Let's say the maturity of a bond is 5 years, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At the first phase, the coupon is going to be 4% of the principal, right? Here at the t is equal to 2, at t is equal to 2, it is going to be 5% of the principal. At t is equal to 3, let's say it is going to be 7% of the principal. At t is equal to 4, it is going to be 8% of the principal, right? At t is equal to 5, let's say it's going to be 10% of principal. This is how a step up coupon behaves like. Every period or every predefined step, it increases. The coupon on the principal increases. So at maturity, obviously the maturity amount will be paid, which were invested by the buyer. Credit linked coupon bonds. As the name suggests, if the credit quality improves, this will reduce the coupon. If the credit quality degrades or downgrades, that is, it goes down, this means coupon will go up. One demerit of this is, if the condition is bad, so it can aggravate a bad credit situation, because when the downgrade happens, the coupons also increase. So there is more cash crunch for the company. Payment in kind coupon bonds. So let's say again, the maturity of a bond is 5 years. Now whatever the coupon rate is, let's say it is 10%, 10%, like this it goes, the issuer can pay this amount in either bonds or stocks, right? It need not pay it in cash. So this kind of a bond is basically a protection. This kind of a bond is a protection against liquidity crisis for the issuer. Because it is a protection against liquidity crisis for the issuer and the risk is with the buyers, therefore yield has to be high compared to a regular bond, comparatively. Now there is something called a toggle option. A toggle option means the issuer can choose whether to pay in cash or pay in kinds, that is, pay in the form of stocks or bonds. This is called a toggle option. This is also there in some of the PIK coupon bonds. Deferred coupon bonds. Let's say a bond has a maturity of 10 years, right? So a deferred coupon bond means, let's say from t is equal to 5, coupons will begin. Till 5, the coupons will be 0. Then from 5, coupons will begin. And at the maturity, coupon plus the principal will be paid, right? So at 5, coupon starts at a later period. Then t is equal to 1. Coupon starts at a later period, then t is equal to 1. Index linked bond. Index linked bond is generally a inflation index linked bond. It can be a consumer price index that the bond is. Index linked bond. This kind of a bond, index linked bond, a bond which is linked to some index, let's say a consumer price index or a retail price index, is called an index linked bond. Now why I take these two examples? Because these are the most popular indexes that a bond can be linked to. So linked with CPI, that is consumer price index, or retail price index. These are basically inflation indexes. So these kind of bonds, specifically a bond which is linked to a CPI or an RPI, protects the buyer from inflation, right? Protects the buyer from inflation. So a zero coupon index bond. What does this mean? Let's say a zero coupon index bond is issued at time 0 and its maturity is 3 years, 0, 1, 2, 3. In the in-between periods, there will be no payments. The initial principal is paid at t is equal to 0. Only at maturity the inflation adjusted principal will be paid. Principal adjusted for inflation. Inflation for how long? In all these 3 years, whatever inflation has happened, that inflation will be adjusted. So the primary feature of a zero coupon index bond is there is no interim payment and only a final inflation adjusted or an index adjusted principal payment is paid. So the primary feature of a zero coupon index bond is there is no interim payment and the principal is adjusted for the inflation across the maturity and paid finally at the maturity period. Interest indexed bonds. So let's say a similar bond is there which has a maturity of 3 years. Initially you pay a principal. Here the difference between these two is the final payment will be the same principal, but the inflation adjustment or the index adjustment will happen at the coupon payments C1, C2, C3. These coupons will be adjusted for the index changes. So the primary feature of an interest indexed bond is there is no change in the principal payment at maturity. The only change that happens is the interim coupon payments adjust for the index changes. Capital indexed bonds. Let's say again a bond has 3 years of maturity. Initially a principal is paid. There is a constant coupon that is paid across the maturity, and then a principal which is adjusted for the index is paid. Okay, so whatever the coupon is, the difference between the index and the coupon in each of these periods is adjusted at the final principal payment. This is the difference between a coupon indexed bond and an interest indexed bond. So features will be no change in coupon payments. Final principal is adjusted for the variation of the index and the coupons. Then we come to index annuity bonds. Now what are these? Again, let's say a maturity of 3 years is there. Initially a principal is paid. Now in every period an annuity is paid, A1, A2, A3, in such a way that there is no principal payment at the end separately. So this is basically a fully amortized bond, and the index adjustment happens in both interest and principal across the period in such a way that there is no requirement for a maturity principal payment in extra. Only the annuity amounts are paid in each of these periods, A1, A2, A3. So what are the features? Firstly, it's a fully amortized bond, which means principal at maturity is 0. Both interest and principal are paid each period, and both interest and principal adjust for the index changes. Both principal and interest adjust with respect to the index. Option embedded bonds. Now what are option embedded bonds? These are basically bonds which have an option either to the issuer or the buyer. What is the option? The option for the issuer is either to buy back, and for the buyer it is to sell. These are two options that are available. Buyback option remains with the issuer and selling option remains with the buyer. Now we will understand these things through the terms callable bond and puttable bond. Now what is a callable bond? Let's see. A callable bond is a bond which gives the issuer the option to buy back the bond at a predetermined time and at a predetermined price. So this is option to the issuer to buy back the bond from the buyer at a mentioned time and price. So when is a callable bond beneficial to the issuer? Let's see. Let's say a bond has a maturity of 3 years. The issuer issued the bond against a certain principal and a 8% committed coupon on that principal, right? Now, at t is equal to 2, the market rate goes down to 6%. That is, loans become available at 6%. Loans in the market are available at 6% for the issuer. So, the issuer, what that issuer will do right at that point is, so at this point what the issuer will choose to do is, let's say if this bond is B1, the issuer will buy back the bond B1 and he will go for a B2 which is available at 6%. This will happen at t is equal to 2. Provided it is mentioned that the buyer can sell it at t is equal to 2, right? And the price will also be mentioned. So this is what a callable bond is. So a callable bond protects the issuer from falling of interest rates. Protects the issuer from falling of interest rates. Now, what is a puttable bond? A puttable bond is an option to the buyer. Now, what is the option about? It is the option to sell the bond to the issuer when they feel it is appropriate, depending it does not collide with the bond indenture conditions. Now, under what situation is a puttable bond beneficial to a buyer? Let's say again a bond has a maturity of 3 years. The initial principal was paid and say the initial coupon that was committed on the principal was 6%, right? Now let's say at t is equal to 2, the market is giving bonds at 10%. Now what the buyer can do is, at this point, at t is equal to 2, buyer can sell the bond, this bond, let's say it's B1, he can sell this bond back to the issuer, and at the same time he buys the bond that is available at 10%. Let's say this bond is B2. So this is basically an advantage to the buyer. So a puttable bond protects the buyer from rising interest rates. Now here a few more terms we have to understand. One is an American style option. American style option means the option can be exercised at any time. Then there is a Bermuda type option. A Bermuda option can be exercised at predetermined interim periods. Then there is the European style option. This can be exercised only at expiry. So if we are to understand it through these above examples, American option means this B1 could be sold at any point. That is t is equal to 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.35, any point the bond could be sold. Bermuda option means there are predetermined times. Only at t is equal to 1, t is equal to 2 it can be sold. It cannot be sold at any other interim period or any other period for that matter. European option means, let's say the option expires at t is equal to 2.5. Let's say here it expires. T is equal to 2.5. Only at this point, the European option can be exercised. Before this, there is no other point the exercise can happen. Convertible bond. Now what's a convertible bond? So it's like a hybrid between bond and equity. It can start as a bond, then at some point or any point depending on the indenture clauses, it can get converted to equity. That's what a convertible bond is. So the buyer has the option to convert it into equity depending on what the clauses in indenture are. Whether it can be converted immediately or after some time, that depends on the indenture. Now what's a conversion ratio? So a conversion ratio is basically the number of shares into which each unit of the bond can be converted into. Let's say each unit of the bond is $1,000, right? And the conversion ratio is 50. This means the conversion price, we come to the second one, conversion price, this becomes 1000 by 50, which is 20. So conversion price is basically the price at which each share can be converted into from the bond. Conversion value. Let's say when this bond was converted at $20 per share, the market price of the share was $18. Therefore, the conversion value is basically conversion ratio multiplied by the market price. This is the market price, right? So the conversion value becomes 50 into 18. This is $900. So conversion value is market price per share multiplied by the conversion ratio. And conversion ratio, I will write the definition here. Conversion ratio is basically the number of shares into which each unit of bond can be converted to. Conversion price, we'll revisit once again, guys. It is basically the unit price of the bond divided by the conversion ratio, price at which each share is converted from a bond. So this is equal to conversion price is equal to bond unit price divided by the conversion ratio. Conversion premium. Conversion premium is basically the premium that the convertible bondholder pays to convert the share as compared to the market price of the share. So this is basically calculated as conversion premium is equal to conversion price minus conversion value. So in our example, the conversion price was 20 and the conversion value was 18. So in our example, the conversion price was 50 into 20, which is 1000, and the conversion value was 50 into 18, right? So this is 1000 and this is 900. So the conversion premium was 100. So conversion premium is a premium paid by the convertible bond buyer to convert the bond into shares compared to the market price of the share. Now we will understand conversion parity. Conversion parity means when the conversion price and the conversion value are equal. This means the conversion premium is 0. So this was an overview about convertible bonds. Now we'll understand what's a warrant, people. So let's say a bond has a maturity of 3 years again, right? Now this bond, say B1, has something called warrants attached to it. Now what does warrant mean? Warrant means this bond gives the buyer the option to convert this warrant into stock at a predetermined price at any point before the maturity, or the condition can depend on the clauses in the indenture. Now let's say this fixed price is $10, right? Let's say at t is equal to 1, the market price of the stock was $5. Now here, converting the stock by paying $10 and then selling it at $5 does not make sense, right? But at t is equal to 2, let's say the market price comes to be $15. Now here, if the buyer converts the bonds at 10, he has the option of gaining some value by selling it at $15. Or he can also choose to keep the stock in his investment portfolio if he finds that the business is growing and the price can grow further. So this is how a warrant can become very beneficial to a buyer. This kind of a option is called sweetener. That is, it makes the bond proposition a little sweeter than a regular bond. The bond portion behaves itself like the bond only. The initial principal is paid, then the coupons are received, and then again the principal is paid. But the warrant parallelly acts as a sweetener, and it gives the buyer an extra advantage over a regular bond. Now, what is a contingent convertible bond? A contingent convertible bond has two main features which separates it or differentiates it from a regular convertible bond. Now, what is a contingent convertible bond? Let's take an example here, guys. Let's say a bank ABC has released contingent convertible bonds or COCOs. This has happened at t is equal to 0. Now at some point t is equal to say 1 or t is equal to say t, the bank ABC has some liquidity problems or some capital problems. Let's say capital crunch has happened, which means the capital adequacy ratio, which is a metric which measures the health of a bank, has fallen. Now, if it falls up to a certain level, the condition can be this COCO or this contingent convertible bonds get automatically converted to equity. Now, this automatic conversion to equity does what? It improves the CAR condition, the capital adequacy condition, and thereby improves the health of the bank. So there are two major differences between a usual convertible bond and a contingent convertible bond. One is this gets converted during a downside. Second is this was not converted at the will of the buyer. This was converted automatically. Converted automatically at predetermined threshold of capital adequacy. So that's about it for this chapter, guys. You can consider joining our CFA L1 classes. You can find it at investide33.com/finnervision. The link is given in the description. You can also consider joining CFA L1 doubt clearing sessions, where all your queries regarding any theoretical concepts or any problem sets will be solved. And in both the cases, you will get access to the practice item sets. Apart from these three, we have also introduced placement assistance and an opportunity for students who are learning to earn some income, extra income. Those details will be shared with the students who gain access to our programs. Thank you.